I would just take about 2 minutes for opening remarks on behalf of the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy, and then pass on to the experts in the room today. My name is Damian Nekowski. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy. And the reason that we're engaging in this conversation today and why we're hosting it is for the past 3 years, we've been trying to understand and develop ways of countering the transnational anti-gender movement as it's been growing and mounting attacks at the national, international, and multilateral levels. Most recently, we published a study on the impact of anti-gender actors on multilateral structures in Europe and what that might mean for the protection of human rights, and also what that might mean for activists who are operating at the national level to respond and advocate for broader protections in terms of legislative change and social attitude change. So one of the strengths that we've identified of the anti-gender movement has always been the amount of money that they have access to, so the financing. And we already know there's excellent research out there on the funding that they receive from, that anti-gender actors receive from other anti-gender actors, or those in whose interest it also publicly is to roll back the rights of women, LGBTQI people, and other marginalized groups. But we also have highlighted in previous research that it is likely that anti-gender actors benefit from public funding in general as well, also from, in particular, also from actors who are at least outwardly committed to gender equality or even feminist foreign policy. And following the excellent work done on Ghana a few months ago, today's conversation is extremely important. And for this, we're really proud to be partnering with the Institute for Journalism and Social Change to have this conversation today, and to then also hold governments accountable for their commitments, so that they actually put their money where their mouth is, but they also don't actively undermine the protection of those most marginalized in development partnership countries. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm very happy to hand over to Claire Provost, the co-founder and director of the Institute for Journalism and Social Change, for the presentation of the findings, and then the excellent panel afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm also going to be quite brief in my remarks. I'm just going to share my screen. 1 second. Okay. So I just have a brief presentation of this research that has been put together in a report that will be very shortly online on the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy's website. This research has revealed a really staggering number of connections between anti-LGBT religious organizations in Uganda and international aid donors and development agencies. So these organizations are, for example, named in dozens of ongoing or recent aid-funded projects, according to data on these projects that has been published by the aid and development agencies themselves. Altogether, these projects have a total values of more than $75 million since 2014. At least 40 million of this appears to be direct transfers to these groups. The aid donors identified in this research are all members of the Equal Rights Coalition, supporting the rights of LGBT people globally. Several of them also have explicitly feminist foreign policies. Some of this funding and partnerships that we've identified are ongoing, including with the Netherlands, the US, the UK, and UNDP, involving a number of donors and other multilaterals. The report that we've put together includes details of each identified project and its source. It also includes tables of examples of the Ugandan groups' anti-LGBT activities, and also the examples of donors' global LGBT rights commitments, of which there are many. This research was importantly all based on material in the public domain. So the data on the identified aid projects, partnerships, and funding comes primarily from records published by donors and development agencies themselves to the International Aid Transparency Initiative, as well as to some of their own portals, such as usaspending.gov for the US. Here you can see an example at the top of the Interreligious Council of Uganda coming up as a direct recipient of UK aid money in the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office's International Aid Transparency Initiative data. This is for underneath an ongoing project that is scheduled to end in spring 2024. And that began in 2021 when the UK was co-chair of the Equal Rights Coalition. The Interreligious Council of Uganda, another example, also comes up on a flyer from the UN FPA, the United Nations Population Fund, as an implementing partner above donors including Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Again, in the public domain was a lot of easy to find evidence of the organization's anti-LGBT positions and activities, so including of the Interreligious Council of Uganda and its members. Again, in the public domain was easy to find information about what happened a decade ago when the Anti-Homosexuality Act 2014 was passed at the end of December 2013. At that time, donor responses included the US cutting aid to the Interreligious Council of Uganda. And as a result of that, it was locally reported that the group had to downsize and fire staff. The report that you can shortly find on the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy's website was the product of very rapid response public interest research and a team that crossed borders as well as disciplines. It is possible that the true scale of connections is quite a bit larger than what we've identified. In many cases, we've been quite cautious with how we've interpreted, we've been overall cautious with how we have interpreted the data, and further inquiries could identify further connections as well as more information about the decision-making behind the identified funding and the partnerships. We've also stopped short, and I just wanted to flag this, that we've stopped short in the report of making concrete recommendations as to what should happen as a result of this information coming to light, because we believe that a series of really serious conversations led by different organizations and spaces and communities need to happen in order to figure out what needs to happen. But we know that Uganda is not the only country where aid donors have been connected to anti-LGBTQI groups. So as Damian mentioned, last year, myself and Nana Darkoa Sekyiamah, who's on the call, published an investigation with CNN that showed such connections in Ghana, where there is also a repressive anti-LGBT bill being discussed. So this suggests that including actions and potential recommendations that could come up related to this information in Uganda, that donors and development agencies and LGBT rights advocates that care about how funding moves and need to look also more broadly across funding and partnerships in all countries and through all of the different donor quote unquote supply chains to ensure that these practices are not undermining human rights commitments anywhere. And that's the end of my brief presentation.
Thank you so much, Claire. I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. Yes? Perfect. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Elizabeth Kemigisha. I'm a feminist lawyer from Uganda, and I'm currently organizing the Uganda Association of Women Lawyers, FIDA Uganda, where I do the economic justice program. I know that we do not have a lot of time, but we do have very many brilliant panelists today. So I'll use the first 2 minutes to introduce my panelists for today, who will then help me get into the details of today's conversation. So one of my panelists is Claire, an investigative journalist and a co-founder of the Institute for Journalism and Social Change, and has also previously worked at The Guardian and the Center for Investigative Journalism in London. She's also been with Open Democracy, where she was heading global investigations. Thank you so much, Claire, for making time. We do have Ross, a senior policy fellow at the Center for Global Equality, in the US, and is also available, by the way. We do have Ross also, who's a senior policy fellow at the Council for the Global Equality, Council for Global Equality. And then next, we do have Ophelia Kemicha, a friend, and a Ugandan also, who is a human rights lawyer and formerly with ISLA, which is the Institute for Strategic Litigation in Africa. We do have Willie Mutunga, who is a former Chief Justice of Kenya and also a former Ford Regional Director. We do have Ponso, who is also a great speaker and part of the team that has supported this whole process. So thank you very much, Ponso, for investing in such a brilliant but also very necessary process right now as we talk about decolonization of aid and the conversations around protection of rights of marginalized communities. I do have Nana, also part of the speakers, who is an African feminist activist and an author of The Sex Lives of African Women. Thank you so much, Nana. Nana is also part of the team that put together this important report that we are launching today, and she'll be part of the speakers. Then lastly, I do have Edward, who is an LGBTIQA human rights activist from Uganda, but is also a founder of Let's Walk Uganda, that is based here in Uganda, where I'm speaking from. I'd like to quickly, I think, begin with Nana, who will set the pace for us today because they are part of the team that put together this report. And Nana, maybe just to hear from you in a few minutes, why was this report necessary and why at this time?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So Claire had mentioned the earlier reports and investigation we had done in Ghana. And at the time, we found that over $5 million had basically gone to some of the leading religious organizations that in Ghana have been pushing for an anti-LGBTI bill. And obviously with everything that's going on in Uganda, we thought to ourselves, and we spoke to a couple of Ugandan activists and said, would it be worthwhile if we were to investigate funding flows into Uganda? And we did, and to our shock, we found like the scale of funding that have gone to some of these religious organizations in Uganda, organizations that have spoken publicly and are advocating the hatred of queer communities in Uganda. It was really shocking to us to find that so much donor aid had gone to these organizations. And we felt like we just needed to put this research out in the public interest. And we really frankly feel this has to end. We don't think organizations that promote hate should be funded. And this is very simply our motivation for doing this research.
All right, thank you so much, Nana. And maybe I'll go to Ponso, who is also, who's been actively involved in ensuring that this research is put together, but also going ahead and walking the talk of funding, on following up where funding is going, especially in African countries. And I know that as a feminist, this is an important subject for you right now because of the initiatives that you have supported in the past and the initiatives that you continue to support now. So to hear from you, Ponso, why was this a valuable investment? And maybe to hear from you on what the resistance has been for you as a person who is doing the active work of investing in this report and many other initiatives to fight back on hatred of LGBTI persons in Africa.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think for us, firstly, as the African Women's Development Fund, it's important to understand that we absolutely fully support women and girls and gender diverse people in all of their diversities. And we recognize that if we are to achieve our vision of a world where freedom and dignity are achieved for all, and where gender justice is a reality for African women, girls, and gender diverse people, it has behoved on us to ensure that our support and our influencing is in support of all of those communities. Why it's important for us now to not only invest in those groups, but also to continue our conversations and influencing with some of those bigger bilateral and multilateral funders is because we absolutely believe in the right to the choices that individual consenting adults on whatever choose to make. And for us as women, as African women, who over many decades and centuries have been oppressed by patriarchal and capitalist systems and structures, which mean we are not able to make our own choices, believe we can only be free when we are all free. So for us as AWDF, with the mission that is about and built upon supporting and funding the aspirations and dreams of all African women, it is absolutely imperative that we support the whole community of women on the continent. I think also for us, you know, as a recipient ourselves of funds from many of the governments who have been identified as supporting those who, you know, who push hate, discrimination, and worse, is that there is a conversation to be had around the extent to which their stated aims for bringing about the realization of rights of all communities in Africa are being undermined by some of the decisions that they are making about where their money goes. So on the one hand, AWDF receives funding to support African women and girls and gender diverse people. And on the other hand, other groups are receiving funding to undermine those. So from a purely pragmatic point of view, it doesn't make investment sense. The second thing I'd also like to say is that we, as a recipient of funds from many of those communities in the global north, absolutely understand the need for integrity and due diligence in all of the decisions that we make. And going back to what I said about the contradictions between funding groups who are working in some respects in opposition of each other, there is a question. For us, safeguarding is important, autonomy is important, and supporting the missions of civil society organizations that are for the liberation and freedom of all African women, girls, and gender diverse people is absolutely important. Yes, funding is important, but for us also information and facts and data and evidence are absolutely key, which is why for us supporting this factual research was absolutely key, absolutely important in the case of Uganda, and increasingly as we see this happening across Burundi, across Kenya, across Malawi, across Zimbabwe, and I could go on. So Elizabeth, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Fonso, for just speaking about why this was important, an important investment for a feminist group like yourself. And I think before I go to the other speakers, I should have begun with Ophelia and Edward, who come from Uganda and have lived here for a very long time, but have organized from different spaces. So maybe to start with you, Ophelia, on your lived experience as a feminist who was organizing through either the courts of law, but also through lobbying parliament, but also existing and organizing with other feminists in communities to build that critical mass that's necessary to fight back some of this anti-LGBTI propaganda. What your experience has been, but especially around this time when this bill was introduced, now that we are more aware that there's more funding to anti-LGBTI groups, and knowing that many of the communities we live in are deeply homophobic, and the dynamic that you see where many Ugandan LGBTI persons are living. So just to speak about what your experience has been and why maybe you think this fact-finding research will be important for activists that are doing work in Uganda for protection of LGBTI persons.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. Just to know that Elizabeth and I are not related, it's just a really common name. I think
Nana.
Yeah, it's always really interesting for me because I had someone ask me if I was married to Elizabeth, so that was interesting. Thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be in the presence of these great minds. Just first of all, good morning from Washington, DC. I'm currently in DC pursuing school, so I'm going to leave the questions about like the current moment to Edward to answer in terms of like what's happening on the ground. But I will speak more from my experience as a feminist activist and as a lawyer working in Uganda and across the continent. So first of all, I think it's important to name that these groups that are named in this report are not necessarily set up for the purpose of anti-LGBT organizing. You know, they are ostensibly good groups, and in some cases they do good work. I have worked with the Interreligious Council before on a completely different issue. And they do work around community organizing, gender-based violence, and things like that. So it's easy for such groups to kind of, not necessarily to hide, but to pair the good with the bad. And you can understand how funders can see that from a pragmatic approach and say, well, they also do good work, and kind of overlook this issue of anti-LGBT organizing. So first of all, to name that, and to say that this is an opportunity in some ways for us to reshape the way that some of these organizations work, especially for religious organizations in a deeply religious country like Uganda. It would be such an asset to have them at the very least stop spreading hate, you know, like just at the very basic principle of do no harm. And if they can't stay silent, then they shouldn't, you know, they shouldn't continue to be funded, you know. I think that it's important for us to also name the source of this kind of anti-LGBT organizing. There has been several, you know, lots of research done over the years from the previous anti-gay, we've been here before 2013, 2012, before that in 2009, before that in 2005, and before that, you know, you can just trace all the way back to the 90s, these waves of anti-LGBT organizing that happen, and that are based in countries like the US, where I am, from hate groups that go and whip up, you know, what would maybe is like latent homophobia in countries like Uganda, Ghana, and other places. And what they call strong family values here, they call African values on the other side. So just, it's important for us to really look into the particulars of the people that we are dealing with, the organizations that we're dealing with. What do they present as? What language are they using? And what are the ways that we can think about either reshaping their work or calling for their, you know, kind of defunding, as they say here. So that's a really important thing. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was that it's important that we remember that there was a time when it was really normal for people to try to work and organize without women. And I think LGBT issues are this thing that feels like an add-on, where people think that it's a trial, you know, to say let's be inclusive, or let's just, you know, desist from pushing for the criminalization, the further criminalization really and marginalization of LGBT people. And now it's I still think it's extremely strange, although some people don't, when I see a panel that has no women on it, because I just don't understand how that can happen. So I think that it's important for donors and people who are giving money to this kind of work to really name that they prioritize inclusiveness and that they want a truly non-discrimination approach to this kind of work, so that it's not an add-on. It's, you know, it's from the very start we say that these are the principles, and that we don't have to, you know, look at it as an extra or as a burden, because LGBT people don't require special rights. They just, you know, we just need the same rights as everybody else, which is to live, to, live in our homes and love and, you know, do whatever it is that other people are doing. So I'll end there for now and hand it back to you, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ophelia. I think I like that you remind us to name the source of anti-LGBTI organizing. I think it's important over time to keep naming and knowing who is supporting what and who is interested in what work. I like that you also touched the issue of transparency that also Ponce spoke about. Transparency and due diligence as we do this work, who are we organizing with, and they be transparent on who they are supporting. And many times when we speak about institutions we are collaborating with, like Ophelia has mentioned, you will find that a few organizations, I don't even know any in Uganda currently, that are majorly formed as anti-LGBTI rights groups. They're usually religious groups that are doing a lot of other amazing work. But as you were speaking, Ophelia, I was even thinking, how amazing is that work if you're spreading hate to a particular other group because you believe your religion prescribes that much. So thank you so much for just raising those important issues. I will pass the mic to Edward to speak about this new, in quote unquote, I don't think like it's something that came out of the blue, so it's not new, but this wave of the LGBT, the anti-homosexuality bill right now in Uganda. And maybe as you're speaking, Edward, it would be important for you to speak about how that changes in even how LGBTI organizations that are not working on health, especially HIV, the way that changes in the ways of who is receiving what money and to do what work would be important to hear about, especially in this time. So Edward, you could take the mic.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I appreciate every panelist here and of course, everyone who is out there watching. Again, my name is Edward Mutebi. I'm a Ugandan. Currently, I'm in Nairobi, Kenya. I must say that I'm a refugee who lives in Germany. And the reason why I'm in Germany is definitely because my life was in danger in Uganda and I couldn't stay there. I'm very much in touch with the situation in Uganda, so whatever information I'll be providing is definitely firsthand. This is, of course, I get information from the organization which I founded, that's Let's Walk Uganda. What I can start with is religion in Uganda is the backbone of the Anti-Homosexuality Bill. I mean, without religion, we wouldn't be even here, I guess. And why would I say that religion is the backbone of the Anti-Homosexuality Bill? Is because in 2009, when we first had the very first bill introduced, it was very much supported and pushed by the religious actors and religious organizations. Definitely, they came with various reasons. They came with the issue of supporting or like trying to protect the family. I mean, just the way you're having it right now in Kenya, they're coming in the name of family protection and all that. And then it graduated to what we are having right now. I mean, it graduated to 2011, when we had an activist killed. That's David Kato. In 2019, another activist, Brian Waswa, is killed. So what would I say by just giving those simple examples of people being killed, activists being killed? Is that religion, people really learn so much from religion and people respect religion, especially from Uganda. I've been a Catholic, I've also attended born again preachings, and I see how followers really follow and respect preachings from the pastors or priests. So I would definitely say that I would like and I would love to attach all these matters on the religion or on the pastors, because if it wasn't the religion, if it wasn't for the preachings, if it wasn't for all those homophobic words that come out of the pastors and the priests, probably wouldn't have had David Kato being killed, probably wouldn't have had Brian Waswa being killed, probably wouldn't have had all the discrimination that we're having in Uganda that is unexplained, the murders. I mean, I'm mentioning David Kato and Brian Waswa because those are the commonly known, but there have been several other murders in Uganda which have been not explained. And trust me, the religious sectors and religious organizations have never come out to condemn, for example, the death of David Kato. No religious institution came out to say, oh, we condemn the killing of David Kato. We never saw that. And even all the discrimination, the persecution that has been coming up, religious leaders have never come out, I mean, to pronounce themselves against all these really these inhuman treatments. I mean, we live in a country, my colleagues live in a country, because me, as I said, I'm a refugee. It's very hard for me to travel back to Uganda, but I mean, I can testify that I mean, sometimes I manage to cross, that's off record, to cross to Uganda. So I know how these people are living. I know how people are persecuted. I know how people live at the brink of fear, at the brink of being, what I see is religious leaders calling for simple erosion of a certain community, simple erosion, basically any religious person who can support a bill which calls for death sentence. I wouldn't really, I mean, who would call that if I told you are a religious leader who believed in the Bible? We have seen the Bible being misused to preach hate, to preach discrimination, to preach all sorts of evil against queer people. So for me, this report, I mean, it has just come at the right time, because it's high time that these religious leaders were held accountable for whatever they say out. When the 2023 bill was just tabled, I mean, at least I saw a video clip, not one, not two, but at least this specific one. It's coming from a Muslim sheikh. I mean, this is not Christianity, but I think most of the institutions which have been investigated are from the Christianity side of religion. But I mean, for the Muslims who are out there, I saw a sheikh calling, I mean, on video for people, when you find gay people, go and, I mean, behead them. That was the statement. So, I mean, we should start putting people, individual people to account. I mean, religious leaders should be put to account individually for their wrongs. Again, when the funding is coming in, we should now start thinking about how is funding distributed into these regions. I think now it's high time funding, instead of going to religious leaders who are again going to preach hate, who are going to preach discrimination, let the funding go directly to organizations like gay organizations, so that they can implement, I mean, some of these things that the church has been implementing, because we have seen LGBT organizations and women organizations being very good organizers and very good. I mean, there are so many organizations or projects being run by women organizations and LGBT organizations, and they're running very safely and very nicely without anything. So instead of funding, putting money where it's going to turn out to be deadly to a certain section of people community, I would suggest that this money is directed to these women and LGBT organizations. And again, if any money is going into religious organizations, let us take the do no harm principle, just as Elizabeth mentioned or talked about it. Those are some of the principles that should be given. Those are some of the conditions that should be put forward for all the money that is going to be, or that should be flowing into the country, supporting religious people. I mean, let's start scrutinizing every cent that comes to those religious leaders. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Edward. You raised important issues, and you know, religious fundamentalism is a very extreme thing, because we know that right now in Uganda, even when we're a secular country, we have a church state, yeah, so we cannot inherit a lot, we cannot separate a lot of what is happening in the anti-LGBTI movement or agenda from what religious fundamentalists have been doing over time in many African countries. Like Nana and Ponce and everyone else has said, this is not coming out of nowhere. We have seen the same happen in Ghana, and if you see the relationship with what those both bills look like, you will see that there's a coordination of sorts, right? At the end of the day. I will now go to Claire. Claire, I don't know, maybe since Claire spoke at the beginning, I know that there's some panelists that haven't spoken. I'd like to just maybe hear from Willie Mutunga, if you're still on. Willie is a former Chief Justice of Kenya and a former Ford Regional Director. And I know that because of the role that judiciary plays in a lot of fighting back of LGBTI persons. In Kenya, we saw this, and I know that many Ugandans that organized around the Anti-Homosexuality Act of 2014 and the one right now, we're really looking at the judiciary to serve many LGBTI persons by finding that these laws do not actually are harmful to many communities and do not uphold the African family unit that Ophelia spoke about earlier. So just to hear from you, your perspectives on how you think the judiciary has continued to either give hope to LGBTI persons and the groups that are organizing, and if you've received any kind of support either from communities or groups in this work that you do for protection of LGBTI persons.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll turn on my video so that you confirm I'm not a robot, and then I'll switch it off because it messes up my audio, okay? Okay, that's me. I just wanted to to talk about the Kenyan situation and talk about what we have seen as very, very important sides of struggle for, for gay rights. And I think this research that we're seeing today, this report, is also a great side of struggle. And when I saw it, I could see that donors are being, coming up with double standards, and maybe it could be hypocrisy, maybe it could be perfidy, and some being duplicitous, and that's good, because it's a new, a new site of struggle that we have to, to get in and be very, very, very aware of it. Now, in the case of Kenya, I think all of you know that there was that very positive decision by the Supreme Court about gay registration and gay association. And what people don't know is that that decision started at the High Court level, and the High Court ruled it. It was a unanimous decision of 3 judges, and then it went to the Court of Appeal, and the majority there was 3-2. So that was great, and then the Supreme Court 3-2. So we're talking of our superior courts, the 3. We have 9 judges who have actually found in support of gay organizing, and the 4 who dissented. And there are other cases, of course, that are coming up, the decriminalization of the Victorian laws that came to Kenya via India. They've been repealed in Britain and other places, but we are using the Constitution to basically say they are unconstitutional. And at the High Court, the High Court came up with a decision that which surprised a lot of people, and you will see that when you read the dissenting judgments by judges. It's like they are basically saying, if you are said to be gay, you are already committing an offense, a criminal offense, when actually in terms of law, we know you've got to have the evidence anyway. And you cannot just presume that people are breaking laws when you don't have that evidence. And coming from judges, that surprised me, immensely. But the Supreme Court will be hearing that matter, in due course, and there are judges in the Supreme Court, like the current Chief Justice and 2 other judges, introduced what are theological arguments actually in this struggle, because we tend not to respond to these homophobes, in churches and mosques, when they quote, just isolated verses from the Bible. So the theological arguments that we get from Desmond Tutu, for example, in his book, God is Not a Christian, the arguments we get from Abby Sachs and Edwin Cameron, who are judges of the Constitutional Court in South Africa, where they also, use theological arguments, which are very powerful. The people have quoted Pope Francis when he was talking about Jesus, and when Jesus said he wasn't going to judge on that woman who was caught, and quoting the Bible, it said she was caught alone, the one they wanted to stone. And Jesus said, whoever hasn't committed should be the first to throw the stone. And Pope Francis, when asked about this issue, he said, who am I to judge? He could have been more forthright and basically defend the rights of gay community, but there are a lot of sites where, like in the case of Kenya, there's an Anglican church that on Sunday opens its doors to queer, okay? And the pastor is gay, okay? And fought his way within the Anglican church to get that space. Okay, there is another church which is called the Other Ship, which is also supports, you know, gay rights, and they are building these theological arguments which are actually powerful, you know. They all come from Desmond Tutu's argument, basically, that when he says that the God he worships is not homophobic, when he says that people don't, churches or religious organizations don't own God, and God is God of all creation, created the gay community as well. So those arguments are now getting into the courts, and I think we should pay attention to them, and we should, you know, we should use them, because there is a lot of that from these hate groups, quoting the Bible. And recently, there was a pastor who was quoting from Leviticus, you know, which is in the Old Testament. But he was answered with quotes from Hebrews, because Hebrews talks about the covenant with Jesus Christ, not the Moses one, okay? So, and it's Jesus who basically says this about the woman who was said to be an adulterer. And it's these religious arguments, I've tracked them, and, you know, I use them, you know, when I talk to people. And when you wave Desmond Tutu's book, even some of our preachers here, you know, they haven't read it, and so they will have to read it. And maybe that church in Nairobi of the Anglican, it's a signal to maybe a multi-denominational church that deals with this issue, you know, where we can go and speak out and tell people to stop playing God, and tell people that that there is no one religion which is superior or closer to God than any other. There are scriptures there, so which we could use in these theological arguments. In the case of Kenya, another site for struggle which has become very important is the families, okay? The parents basically coming to groups to basically give testimonies about, you know, their gay children who are harassed by police, who are harassed by landlords, you know, who are discriminated in school, hospital, and that has been very, very important, you know, contribution. The families, and of course we have the public intellectuals who are in public interest litigation, and I think Uganda has examples of that. Professor Loko Nyango has written in his book about that particular public interest litigation in Uganda. And the fact that this anti-homosexuality bill in Uganda has also united the civil society organizations in the struggle against it. And that's important when you have human rights groups, social justice groups, feminists, and others, you know, come carrying, you know, placards saying very, very clearly that gay rights are human rights. And so that is another, sides of struggle. Of course, the international civil society in East Africa, we have HIVOS. HIVOS, I think, has always been supportive, and we have to build solidarities with those. Okay, and the issues of public intellectuals also is important in terms of research. I didn't know about these hate groups. I knew generally that there is Christian fundamentalism in the US that actually funds these hate groups. And also after I saw that movie called God Loves Uganda, it was also a movie that basically showed me what was, was going on. We need to expose them. And I know they were in Uganda the other day, and the guy who is bringing in the family values bill was there, and some very, very homophobic lawyers, who are members of the Opus Dei, they are always there. And those are the people we are debating using theological arguments as well. So I think the gay rights movement in Kenya is very strategic in the way they organize, and that's very important. And we have to use these sites, struggle, consolidate them, because we have governments and dictators who use this issue, as a diversion. Okay, they're talking about sin. When we don't know how many sins are actually committed by heterosexuals, okay? Why haven't they also made adultery a crime? Okay, there are a lot of issues that we're going to debate to show the hypocrisy and to basically show that in a constitution like Kenya, where the vision is a secular society, where devil worshippers and atheists and everybody else are allowed to organize, we cannot have religious groups that say this. We've started debating them. We didn't debate them now, but we feel that it's good to expose these bishops who come from churches that have been accused of sodomizing young kids, and they think they have the right, to attack people. Yeah, and that's going on. That's okay. I mean, the guy called Kaluma, or whatever it is, Peter, the MP who is coming up with the Feminist Bill, there's stuff out, against him, showing that he has done stuff and so forth. So for Kenya, I think we're getting, in terms of strategy, to coming to war, okay? But the movement here has been very strategic, using courts, organizing other groups to support them, which I think is very important, getting the communities also to support, what is happening. And but I think in our case, the gloves are off. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think you bring that perspective that is very interesting for us to be able to compare what's happening in Kenya with the trends of what's happening in Uganda right now. And I like that you speak about some of the organizing that Kenyans are doing around going through the church, even when we know that it's a very harmful space for many LGBTI persons in East Africa and the whole of Africa, really. I just wanted to run back to Rose. I know that you are involved in some of the work around the previous cuts, the US aid cuts to the Interreligious Council of Uganda. And this is a huge part of this report right now that we are launching. So maybe just to speak about your experience around that. And as maybe you do speak about that, you respond to a question that I've taken note of that also sort of relates to this, on what the next steps would be for communities, for activists for LGBT and for feminist groups that are interested in organizing around this? What are the next steps and how can we take this fight for justice to the next level? Ruth, are you still on?
Elizabeth, who was that to?
That was to Benny. Yeah, that's to you.
Okay,
Sorry.
that is to me. Sorry. Apologies, Elizabeth. So yeah, I think it's a great question in terms of what can communities do next. I mean, the most urgent thing is there's an International Day of Action and Solidarity for LGBTQ Ugandans tomorrow. And so there are going to be protests and activities in which we can also hold our own governments to account. That is a huge part of this. I think it's so dangerous to consider the anti-rights and anti-LGBTQI movement in Uganda, and as other folks have mentioned, also in Kenya and Burundi and Tanzania and Ghana right now. It's so dangerous to consider it organic. You know, we're talking about colonial era laws, then we're talking about huge amounts of untracked money and organizing coming from American evangelical groups, evangelical churches, and also Citizen Go and other sort of European religious organizations. And then you're talking about donor governments, and the donor governments are coming on top of this and putting huge amounts of money into organizations. So it's really important to understand for people on the webinar from countries in which these donor governments are accountable, is really thinking about how do we hold our own governments to account. PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief from the US, has a huge imprint in Uganda. It continues to fund the HIV response there at about $400 million a year. And there's a really important obligation to make sure that money is not funding human rights abuses, that it's not funding organizations who then use the capacity that PEPFAR has built to call for the death of LGBTQI Ugandans. I think it's particularly raw because the HIV movement is so connected to LGBTQI liberation. We have 40 years of experience and data that says stigma and criminalization against LGBTQI people is what drives the HIV epidemic in many places. And so to know that, and on the other hand, be building up the power and sort of capacity of an organization like the Church of Uganda that is in the press conferences, is in the prayer circles promoting a bill that would make PEPFAR illegal, that would make it impossible to do rights affirming in any way useful HIV services in Uganda. We don't have time to sort of go, oh, this looks a bit rough. Like, we have to talk now to our governments about how they are investing in the hate that is putting our friends, our colleagues, and just on a raw level, the programs at risk. So I mean, I think the most pressing thing is to show up tomorrow and be visible, use this data in the report as everyone's going to start combing over it, to be very specific in our own asks to donor governments about who they are investing in and what their expectations there are. We have a really short timeline to try to shift the international discourse about whether there's going to be a big economic and social response to Uganda for pushing a bill way beyond the norms and universal human rights, because Kenya is watching to see if there's going to be repercussions. Ghana is watching to see if there's going to be repercussions. So standing in solidarity visibly and vocally tomorrow has benefits for the rights movement around the world.
Hello?
I think it's back to you,
Hello? Can you
Elizabeth.
still hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. I think I'm still muted. So thank you very much. And I think what you do is lead us to the next part of this agenda today, which is us really just picking a few questions. We do not have a lot of time. We have less than 10 minutes, so we may not have a lot of time to ask all the questions, but I've seen that we got some responses in that chat room for some of those really, those questions that needed a response almost immediately. But for now, let's use 5 minutes to ask the questions, and then we'll use the last 5 minutes to get responses, and then last comments from our speakers. So I don't know, yeah, you'll just raise your hand, I think, and then we'll take about 3 or 4 questions in the next few minutes.
Elizabeth, because we already have quite a few questions in the Q&A, maybe you can just take some of the key ones and direct them to the speakers. And as they answer, they can also add any final remarks they may have.
Perfect. Thank you, Nana. So there are a bit of questions in the chat already. I see that Nana, you responded to some of them where they need like a link to the report. A comment from Buna, who is asking about thanking the organizers for a timely webinar and speaking about the fact that she's doing HIV policy and advocacy work, was in Nairobi last week where they met local communities to discuss anti-rights movement, which is cascading to other countries like Kenya and South Africa for HIV key populations. And she says that the situation particularly concerning not only the LGBTI groups, but also other criminalized populations such as sex workers who are being further marginalized. So the question is that if in this research, there's any data or information included on HIV criminalized key populations, I think the drafters of this report will be able to speak to that. The other question, we did ask it already. I don't know why I'm not able to scroll down to the other parts of the questions. Nana, if you're able to see the other questions below Matthew's, and you could just help with them out.
Sure, happy to. And maybe I'll just list some of the key questions and then we can go to the panelists. And the panelists can also speak to what they feel most comfortable speaking. There's a question about what kind of counter arguments and tactics have been more successful in fighting the anti-gay narratives. There's a question around advocacy efforts that can be suggested in Uganda, in the Ugandan context around the bill. A lot of people want to know how to proactively support people on the ground. And we already spoke about the day of action that's happening tomorrow. There's a question to Judge Mutanga about if he has a prediction on what the current Supreme Court will do on the Kenyan decriminalization case, now that there's been a backlash to the registration decision for the human rights NGO. And another question to Dr. Mutanga about how we may be able to get religious arguments as well as ethnographic cultural research into the body of evidence that courts use or refer to. Lots of people are asking about the report. Pleased to say the report is now live and it's online. And so you can find that on the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy's website. Other questions have been around whether there are similar efforts to track the funding sources of anti-transgender movements. And I also saw earlier questions about whether this report will be replicated in other African countries. So maybe Claire, can you take the questions around whether there's anything around data on HIV criminalized key populations and intentions to replicate this report in other countries, and maybe we go to the judge to answer the Kenya specific questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, hi. I can say that we don't necessarily currently have specific plans for what is next in this research, but we are planning to continue to follow the potential discrepancies between high-level commitments to women's and LGBT rights by international aid donors and their funding practices. Because from what we've seen, both in the Ghana investigation and also in this investigation, Even donors who commit to LGBT rights internationally, even donors who claim to have feminist foreign policies need watchdogs, need to be held to account. We're very collaborative and would also take some direction into what should be next based on where there is demand for further information. So I've definitely taken note of the suggestions that have come up in the chat, and thank you for those.
Thank you so much, Claire. And Judge Butunga, can you speak to the questions people are asking about in Kenya?
Oh yeah, they want me to toss a coin on that one. I would say, and that's why I was talking about how the superior courts, meaning the High Court, Court of Appeal, and Supreme Court have dealt with the issue of freedom of association. There is in the Supreme Court the possibility they'll hear these arguments, and since the decisions they have come up with in terms of association is now law, and it binds other courts below, that is interesting. What is also interesting is that in the Supreme Court of Kenya, is a judge called Lenaola, who ruled in favor of association in the High Court, where I said the decision was unanimous. There was Lenaola, Judge Ngugi, and Mumbi Ngugi. Then in the Court of Appeal, the majority who actually, found or held that LGBTQIA+ have the right to associate and assemble. The three of them, one was Chief Justice Kome, who is in the Court of Appeal. Who is in the Supreme Court now as Chief Justice, okay? And then there are the three judges of the Supreme Court who also ruled in favor of association. Now, I am of the view that decriminalization should be the easiest thing actually for the courts to, to decide, because the way our constitution is interpreted uses non-legal phenomena such as history. And the reason why those provisions are there about non-discrimination. And now the Supreme Court went ahead and said that sex in Article 27 of the Constitution includes sexual orientation, okay? And a lot of the judgments have also, very wrongly in my view, gone into gay marriages, okay, when that issue was not an issue at all. They just brought it there, and I think that was wrong, and the Supreme Court will definitely see that. And I think just based on the way the courts are developing our jurisprudence and what has happened now in the High Court, if you count the 5 that have said, decided on the right to the freedom of association, there are 5 in the Supreme Court. So in terms of numbers, that's the only thing I can say is a prediction. But having said that, I don't know. I can't be sure. But all I know is that we have very good lawyers who have also come in to support this cause, robustly. And there are a lot of us who are also, helping in terms of cases, and so forth. So, the theological argument, because that was the other question I was raising. It's probably peculiar to the Kenyan situation because our constitution, starts by saying that we acknowledge the supremacy of the Almighty God of all creation. And then it goes on to talk about religious and ethnic diversities. It goes on to say there is no state religion. And then it also goes to say there shouldn't be discrimination on the basis of sex now, which has been interpreted to include sexual orientation. And then the whole issue of freedom of worship, conscience, opinion, and religion. Okay, they are in the Constitution, and there is freedom of African religions. Okay, which were always marginalized. Now it's in the Constitution, basically saying when you talk about God in Kenya, you talk about God of many religions, not just Christianity, Muslim, Hindu, even the devil worshippers and the atheists, agnostics, and humanists, secularists, all of them. And I've always argued myself publicly that it's a good vision of our constitution because it allows judges to now look at these theological arguments, and they have already done it. They have done it very well, but it's it's a double-edged sword, because I also know judges in courts who are church elders. And so if cases go to them, there's that issue. But we are trying to confront it by using the other office, in which all the judges take. And it says very, very clearly that they should avoid, religious prejudices, ethnic prejudices, and political prejudices. So I think the theological arguments that I said should be used can be used politically, in my view. They can be used in the churches, they can be used in the courts. So all those sides now, these arguments, can be used, and people will listen, because if you have churches opening doors for LGBTQI plus people, that's, for me, is progress. And I hope the courts will see what this movement is about. As far as I'm concerned, the religious groups haven't answered one question which is being constantly asked, in Kenya: who created LGBTIQA plus people? If we're talking about creation, so that the theological arguments are also political, they're also legal because they're in the Constitution, and they have to be used. And religious leaders who are open to various arguments, they are using it. Because the Bible, just like the Constitution, has to be interpreted holistically. You cannot just do what the Boers in South Africa did by just using one verse, to argue their apartheid system. And there are, a lot of theologians who actually do that by, quoting verses here and there. And that argument that I was saying, we should use it as a side struggle, and use Desmond Tutu's arguments and others to say, you know what, you are not God. And if you are talking about sin, there are many sins that you are not talking about. Poverty, disease, no education, no health. There are a lot of sins in our society that they don't talk about, and we are going to resurrect them. so that we, we basically even tell these religious people, it's very well known that defilement, incest and rape, it's the work of heterosexuals anyway. So the struggle continues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Apologies, we've gone past the time we had requested to have you with us on this launch. I'd therefore just ask that you stay for a little more 3 minutes to have Edward and Ophelia close us off on what support looks like for LGBTIQ feminist groups that are fighting back right now, not just against this new bill, but against a lot of homophobia in communities and in a lot of law and policy that we see, especially that on HIV/AIDS. I'd request that we both use 1 minute and then we'll have us close. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I can come first. In my conclusion, first of all, I would say that the world and Africa is watching Uganda. So your contribution to stand up and fight for the LGBTQ rights will count so much. Recently, in a few days, the president gave a statement before he sent back the bill to Parliament with very strict recommendations. He called the Western countries imperialists, and then he praised religious leaders for the supporting of the bill. But again, he also said that Western countries are murderers who want to kill about 1.2 million of people, Ugandans, who are surviving on, I think that's PEPFAR, funds to get HIV/AIDS drugs. I would say that Western countries are not murderers. Religious leaders are the murderers who will be killing the 1.2 million Ugandans if in case this bill is assented into law. Let's not start attaching our issues and our sins to the West. The Western countries have given us funds with conditions. If they don't want the money with conditions, then they shouldn't get or even try to apply for those funding. So the people who are going to die in Uganda, the suffering that is going to happen in Uganda when funding is implemented, the funding is cut, let us not even at any point say it's going to be a Western issue or it's the problem of the West. Let us put the blame to the politicians, to the religious leaders, to our country. It should be blame. So thank you so much for putting up this platform. I want to uphold all the LGBTQ activists and women activists in Uganda who have stood all the test of time for being resilient. Keep on the resilience. Don't stop at fighting until we get the right results we want. Thank you so much.
Wow, powerful words follow. I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. So a couple of things. So first, I want to reiterate that it's important that we send more money to feminist and LGBT organizations. I think that this is a critique that has arisen in a lot of different conversations, especially around things like Feminist Foreign Policy, which say they are feminists, but the money is not going to feminist organizations, it's not going to LGBT organizations, and places that say they have a feminist foreign policy and directly fund police to tear gas us. I think that it's really important that we make sure that the money that we say is supposed to go into feminist work actually goes into feminist work. The second thing I wanted to pick up was somebody mentioned God Loves Uganda in the chat, and I wanted to also give a movie recommendation because I love a good movie. There's a documentary on Netflix called The Family that traces some of the work that happens at the legislative level of whipping MPs to become to join in this kind of anti-gay, so that David Bahatis and the rest where are they radicalized, for lack of a better term. And then the last point I wanted to name is that it's important that we take control of the narrative. I think that one of the things that anti-rights groups do well is to pick up simple concepts like the family, like children, and kind of pervert them to narratives that are not, that doesn't quite follow. So I think it's important that we take control of that narrative to say that, as Justice Mutonga pointed out, that LGBT people are also children. There was a very powerful letter in the Daily Monitor recently written by mothers of LGBT people saying, stop criminalizing our children and stop throwing them out of homes and, allow them to live like all of us. And also lastly, to name that movements are not linear. So I know it feels like, sometimes it can feel like we're moving backwards because this thing keeps coming, it keeps coming back and it seems to come back stronger. But I think it's also important to, to point out that the organizing around this particular bill has been powerful, that feminist and LGBT organizations in Uganda and across the world have done a really good job of, pointing out how hateful this is and of, showing solidarity. So to invite everybody, wherever you are in the world, to pay attention to what's happening in Uganda and to be in solidarity with some of the people who are being affected by this bill. So thank you very much. I find that this platform and this report is also a point of solidarity, and I really appreciate that. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. I think we're closing off on a very, very good note. I think I like what you mentioned, that this report is very, very timely. And like you say, movements are not linear. I think there's usually many times in Uganda when it feels like the movement is stagnant, there's not a lot of success coming through, there are not lots of synergies with other institutions doing even health work, which is a little basic. So it feels great to know that somebody is paying attention to see where the money is going, because we know that money runs the show at the end of the day. So where different players are investing is especially showing us where their interests lie. So to our organizers today, to everybody who's made that time, thank you so much to our experts very much for making the time and speaking with so much love and with so much knowledge on the subject of today's discussion. And have a good evening, good morning, and good afternoon from wherever you are.